Into news and views with myself, Salalo Makudi. The time is 8:31 Central African time, and we're going to be moving into our first story of the day, right here on news and views. Despite South Africa producing and importing enough food to feed every citizen that is in this country, 15 million South Africans still go hungry every single day, and 1 in 4 children under the age of 5 suffer from stunting, which is caused by severe malnutrition. A new piece by Malik Dasoo, Senior Programs Officer at the African Climate Foundation, argues that clever political and economic decisions, not charity or food gardens, will be key to reversing our food insecurity crisis. And he joins us now to unpack the real reasons why hunger persists in a food rich nation like South Africa. Malik, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think let's jump right into it. Let's start with the big picture. South Africa produces enough food for everyone, yet millions and millions still stay hungry. In your analysis, what explains this contradiction, if I can put it that way?
Sure. I mean, the contradiction emanates primarily from how food is accessed, right? So, if you have a country that produces and imports enough, the natural question that follows when you assess that people are not getting enough is how are people accessing it? And people access it in a variety of ways, right? So, one is the price discrepancy. People not earning enough or food prices being too high to allow them sufficient access to to their nutritional demands. So food is too expensive is the first one. The second is the manner in which they access their food. So, where are they shopping? What products are available to them at the prices they're able to buy? And when you look at the breakdown, it is typically the highly processed foods which are very affordable, provide enough calorie intake, so it makes you feel full, but it's not nutritionally sufficient. So these foods are low in nutritional value. So what you often find is people not able to access sufficient nutritional food at the prices they're able to. They then resort to the foods that are not healthy to eat, but keep them full, make them feel full, and that leads therefore to adverse nutritional outcomes. So that's what you often see in childhood stunting, in the rising rates of diabetes and obesity in the country, despite people going hungry at the same time. So there are these contradictions, but these are largely driven by economic forces that are underpinned basically by political decisions.
Mm, Um, One of the most striking points that I gathered in your article is about how there's a corporate concentration. I think that's how you put it. The fact that just 5 supermarket chains control over 60% of food retail in Southern Africa. How dangerous is this kind of dominance for food access and affordability?
And that's exactly the question that needs to be asked. Oftentimes people will look to the supermarkets and say, well, these are the ones who are producing food. They work efficiently along the value chains, so just let them go free on the market. I do want to highlight the danger of this, though. So what you'll often see is that during times of crises, countries that have a very corporate controlled and very small pool of actors who control how people access food are much more vulnerable to economic and environmental shocks. So, as an example, what we saw in East Africa during the droughts of 2022 was that food prices spiked by about 30% in the course of a few weeks, because there were only a handful of suppliers and retailers who control that food. The reason why that happens is because as the shock hits, the supply drops, so there's not enough food going into the system. And when there isn't enough food going into the system, there aren't enough actors who are able to compete against each other and offer lower prices to consumers, right? And so what often ends up happening is the stronger producers are able to consolidate the limited food that is being supplied, and they will hike their prices because it's a crisis, right? Why wouldn't they? They want to make a lot of profit, and if they're the only sellers at that time, a lot of people are going to go there and they have nowhere else to go. So that's a cautionary tale for South Africa, right? In what happens when we allow this kind of pattern to continue. When 60% of retail sales is controlled by 5 companies, that's the risk we run. And in an era of climate and economic disruptions, as we saw during the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the climate crisis, which is unfolding in front of our eyes, we are locking ourselves into a very vulnerable space where we won't have other options if these retailers decide to hike prices at any time.
There's been a lot of solutions that have been brought forward as a way to mitigate the hunger crisis here in South Africa. And one of them, whether it's from these corporates that they'll always seem to find a way to sponsor, or from government in itself, is community food gardens. You seem
Yeah.
to have a different perspective on whether or not they are a solution. Can you expand a bit on that? Because I think everyone, thinks, community food gardens are the way to go. You have access to nutritious food that can be shared amongst the community. It keeps those
Yeah.
that are unemployed in the community busy. Kids are active and they're part of this project. Why is it not a solution as much as
Yes.
we might think it
Yes.
is?
No, it's an excellent question. So let me start by saying I have nothing inherently against food gardens. I think they're a wonderful way of educating people about how our food is produced, how it gets to our plate. It's an excellent education in understanding how important ecology is in supplying the food that we need to eat. It's a great exposure for people to learn how to produce food. And my background is in soil physics and sustainable land management. That's what I studied, and so
How
my
ironic.
well, no. The reason why I therefore say this is because I know how difficult it is to produce food at scale,
Mhm.
right? And the importance here, the reason why I say it's not a solution in itself, is because it is very difficult to use small food gardens in urban areas as a solution to feeding literally millions of people, right? The scales and the numbers just don't match up. What you need is you need production at scale, right? And how that happens, we can talk about. But the issue is, if you don't have a dedicated workforce with enough resources in terms of land, in terms of water, in terms of agricultural inputs, who are actively being resourced, who are actively working on it as their sort of primary entry point, you just simply won't produce enough to meet that demand. And there's lots of studies that can go into that. My argument here is not to vilify food gardens in themselves. It's just to say that the scales at which they produce food aren't enough to meet the demand. What we need is a well-organized food system made up of smallholder, larger agricultural actors who combine to feed the growing demand of our country.
I want to take it back to the role of corporates here, because you pointed out to a rather shocking income disparity, but I think all of us knew the fact. You made an example of Woolworths CEO earning over
Yeah.
1,300 times more than the lowest paid worker. What would a fairer wage structure or corporate accountability in this regard mean for food security?
Yeah. And another really good question. I think the thing we have to remember here is that what we're talking about when it comes to food access is it's price disparity, right?
Mm,
So people need to be earning enough to access the food that they need. When we look at the Woolworths, the Pick and Pay examples, what we often see is the lowest paid workers earning far less than the CEOs. Now, this is not just a practice in the food retail sector. This is across the board, and
mhm.
Just Share has done an excellent analysis of this. People need to be earning more than they are right now. When you have CEOs taking home millions of rands in their bonus pay packages, for providing their shareholder value. That's neither here nor there. But when they're paying people less than they should be for the work that they should be doing, that's contributing to people not earning enough to access food affordably. Interestingly enough, ShopRite recently released their food security index, which sort of analyzes how people are how we're staving off the food insecurity crisis. Um, and what is noticeably absent from this is the sort of dire economic effects that the food retail prices are having. So, in what's called the Essential Food Price Monitoring Report, what we saw was retailers hiking prices during times of crises. So, food prices spike by quite a few percentage points. When those crises abate, so when food production reaches the level it should be at the price that it should be, the
Mm-hmm.
retail prices don't fall as quickly. And I mean that's the question we need to be asking. That's the question for government regulation is how are you guys monitoring and regulating how retailers are providing food for South Africans, for poor South Africans in particular?
Mm, mm. Lastly, unfortunately, we have run out of time, Malik. Your article ends on a very, very positive and hopeful note. You said we are beginning to see public officials take the issue of food insecurity and hunger a bit more seriously here in South Africa. Um, are you really optimistic? Are we finally seeing that shift? And what are some of the examples that you can give that show that these are no longer performative gestures, but
Yeah,
real action to try and tackle food security or food
yeah.
insecurity?
Yeah, I should say before I start this answer that I don't agree with all the elements of these public officials' plans and
Hmm.
policies, but the one I do recognize some important market shifts. So, firstly, at the international level, I mentioned the G20 Task Force on Food Security, which was presided over by South Africa this year. They recognize the importance of food price fluctuations in abating hunger. So they really actively looked at how do you ensure global political alignment to make sure that food prices aren't spiking in an unmanaged way. And this may seem quite straightforward for a lot of people. Like, of course, you would do that. But this is quite novel this year in the sort of global food space. The conversation tended to focus around let's just produce more food that will feed more people, but that wasn't tackling the root cause of the issue. John Steenhuisen, our new Minister of Agriculture, he's called out the private sector. They need to be more efficient in managing food waste. They need to be more efficient in providing food at prices that people can afford. Vuso Ramagopa, our MEC in Gauteng for Rural Development and Agriculture, has said things along a similar line. In fact, a few days ago, Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about the need to regulate the food retail sector. So it's not exactly clear where and how these shifts are occurring, but they are occurring, and I think it comes from the fact that we recognize the hunger crisis in the country is reaching really unmanageable levels. We need to intervene, and we need to be serious about it. We need to look at where the root causes are, and we need to try and abate those. It's no longer useful to do performative approaches.
No, most definitely. Malik Dasoo, Senior Program Official at the African Climate Foundation. Thank you so much. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and hope we chat again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're going to, on that note, Malik Dasoo, as I mentioned, Senior Program Officer at the African Climate Foundation, focusing on sustainable land use and African food systems. His latest article, Clever Economic and Political Decisions Will Manage South Africa's Food Insecurity, makes the case that tackling hunger starts with tackling things like inequality, like disparities when it comes to income and concentration and policy inertia. That's the role of the government. They need to start moving when it comes to enforcing some of these policies that look to tackle food insecurity in this country. You can read the full piece that he wrote on Daily Maverick. I think it's a very, very important one. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be having our hashtag Africa Focus feature, and we'll be looking at Sudan, where families are literally caught between bullets and hunger. More on that concerning story after this.